I'm going to start about people keep drifting in, but that's the way it is with us, isn't it? But I just want to start off, before we actually get going into class, I'd like to have kind of a shout out by different people. And what I'd like you to do is shout out your name and one time that you had a really important experience that gave you awe and wonder. Many times Christians say, oh, if you're a cold rashless or anything else, you don't have any experiences of awe and wonder that really shape you. So, I don't know, have you had any experiences in life that were really profound that shaped you? Anybody?
I think, yeah, I was crossing the, I was driving by myself, I was driving on the, across the Canadian Rockies. And I was out about, I guess, 500 miles from anywhere in either direction at all. And there was a pull-out storm. And I looked out. And I knew I was about 500 miles from anybody, but I was looking out on all this stuff. It was just fantastic. The feeling of aloneness and the immensity of it all. And it wasn't the ocean, everybody says the ocean, but this is all green.
Right.
Mountain.
Any others out here? I'm sure some people have that. Yes?
The birth of my son 23 years ago, it just floored me. It was such an amazing thing to behold him.
Isn't that amazing? My wife, when she delivered our son, all of a sudden, she popped him out like this. But she started crying. She was no crying before that because she was, this muscle woman, she's going to push that baby out. And she starts crying and everything else. And I got all worried about it. Oh my God, so she in pain? She says, no, it's just so beautiful. For me, it was too. Anybody else?
Same for me, with over 50 years to go when the children were born.
Amazing
I had the
experience.
same sort of thing.
It truly connects us with life and others, doesn't it?
It does.
Anybody else? I've had several of those, what Maslow called peak experiences in my own life. And I'm sure all of you have had those. Maybe just afraid to shout out here and everything else. But that's one of the things that happens when you believe in a naturalistic world. What we have here becomes very intensely important at various times. And sometimes it takes an experience like that. We don't appreciate children until all of a sudden that helpless child is before us, and we see that grandeur and the beauty. Sometimes it's in the microscopic. When I was looking under a microscope one time at various algae in a drop of pond water, and my God, it wasn't just algae, it was hundreds of things in that one little drop of water. I thought, my God, there's so much around. E.O. Wilson has said that in 1 cubic inch of topsoil, there's over 1 million organisms in 1 square inch. It's amazing what you can find. Anyway, I just wanted to start that off. I want to tell everybody here, I'm Mike Werner, by the way, and I'm going to do the best job I can. I'm not a professional teacher, so I'll apologize now for my missteps. I know my subject, I'm just not sometimes the best teacher. We're going to have a 2-hour session here. We're going to take a vital break about 8 o'clock. I want to explain that this is going to be both a beginning seminar on humanism and also an advanced seminar. It's going to get intense. We're going to be covering some intense subjects. And I will tell you this, in many cases we're going to just touch on it. And there could be profound long classes on each one of these things. So if we're kind of skimming over it, that's what we got to do. But you know what? If we want to come back at a later time and people have an interest in talking about a specific subject, a class, we can do that. But I want to challenge everybody here. The balance is we got some people that really know humanism, and we got some people who first time. So we're going to try and meet all the needs, but understand, I want to challenge everybody. And I just want to tell you this, everything that I learned about humanism in the 60s, early 60s, when I first got involved in this movement, very early in my life, And it's been one of the most profound things in my life. Just about everything I've learned, other than some of the basics, has been proven wrong or needed correction. Everything. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to be self-critical. I want to get 4 main goals today. First, I want to say, what are we here for? It's the old Greek thing. What is the good, the true, and the beautiful? Big questions. Big, tough questions, right? But here's what we're going to try and do today. We're going to find out what is humanism. We're going to try and answer that question. We're going to answer the question of what is our history within humanism, and what within humanism has been proven wrong. I told you I've got to change my thinking. A lot has occurred in the last 25 years. And where are we today? Okay? Those are the main things. The first 2 items we're going to take in the first hour, the last 2 in the second hour. And keep in mind that, again, in many cases, we're just going to be touching on some of these things. Some of you know that under the last 35 years, humanism has been under various attacks, both outside from fundamentalists, etc., but also liberal religionists, scholars, and even within humanists themselves. The hardest people on humanism have been humanists themselves. We'll talk about some of those critiques. Many of our cherished beliefs have been challenged. Many beliefs are not just wrong, but dangerous. Even today, you know, the atheist free-thinker community that we belong to, I constantly see cases of people holding on to ideas that are just out of date with the latest thinking and dogmatically repeating old mantras that have long been discredited. We say a belief in God lacks firm foundation, for example. Well, sorry folks, we now know that reason and science lack any firm foundation as well. Recently, I saw an announcement about Dr. John Shook of the Free Inquiry Network offering a class on humanist ethics based on rationalism. Sorry, rationalism has been totally discounted. And I'll explain what rationalism, well, I'll tell you now. Rationalism is different from reason. Rationalism is the belief that we can know things with the power of our own mind, unaided by empirical outside evidence or experience. Or it's just the own power of our own mind. There is no firm foundation for ethics based on rationalism, as some will say. Some argue for the logical reputation of God. Again, there is none. Some argue that one value or another is most important. There is none. Some argue that there is a rational basis for human rights, or that one political system or another is the rational one. There is none. When I taught classes at the University of Chicago, I was constantly bombarded, and frankly happened to be an apologist for many of our criticisms about humanism, that in fact, many were right, and I had to let mine defend it. Humanism, you know, in many cases they were frankly naive interpretations within our own community. But some of these were also just plain attacks. I hope to show that some of these insights have occurred largely unnoticed outside the academic community, really. So that what we want to do is be a truly evolving tradition. And that's what we are, an evolving tradition. We will explore an incredible revolution that has occurred and is largely unknown or misinterpreted. If you are a secularist, you may continue to challenge your own thinking about what it means to be one. Most humanists, though, I find relish a challenge to their thinking, because one of the most important character traits that I have ever seen in just about every humanist is courage. Future classes we're going to have, the next one is going to deal on epistemology, or what do we know and how do we know it. That sounds kind of cold and dry, but it's really important. Whenever I hear somebody talking head on TV, talking about this or that, and I don't care what it is, from medical to political to psychological or whatever, I always ask, where is it, the old thing, where is that person coming from? What is the basis of their beliefs? When we get into the second one, ethics, we're going to parse it down and we're going to find out, well, what is the foundation for the beliefs of ethics? And just about every ethical dilemma that we find, ethical controversy, hopefully by the time you get done with this course, you'll be able to distill down and say, oh, that person is such and such, and they're coming from this, and this area here, and this area here, and now I understand it, so it's not confusing. In both cases, you're going to get, frankly, in one class, you're going to get a graduate level class in epistemology and a graduate level class in ethics. I want to state right up front, though, my position. I want you to be a humanist. I want you to be an active humanist. And why is that? Personally, I am a humanist because, as Ray Bragg said, we believe not what we want, but what we must. You know the old idea that, you should believe in God because what does it hurt if you don't believe it? Well, the problem with that is that, I can't just believe something because I want to believe it. I can't unbelieve something. I want to say that one of the things that's important to all of us, I think, that come here is that courage aspect leads out of a factor of religious and an intellectual integrity. We want to be true to ourselves and true to other people and what life really is. Underlying that is a commitment to open-minded critical thinking, open-minded truth. And that's what we're going to try to do here. We don't have any absolute answers here. I'm not going to give you absolute answers. But there's not going to be relativism here either. I'm going to give options and styles. I hated philosophy classes because they would go through all these philosophy. I see somebody laughing. They know what I'm talking about. You go through, you learn all these philosophers and their ideas and everything else. At the end, you say, well, what's the bottom line? And they won't tell you. But remember, a philosophy class is different. They're trying to get you to think. Hopefully I'll get you to think here too. But also I'm going to try and draw at the end tentative conclusions of what most of the academic community thinks. And also, but there are many cases, and we'll talk about these, where there is still very great controversy, and we'll talk about the major philosophical positions and controversial positions that they hold, what those competing viewpoints may mean, so that you can kind of see these things, but not just be hanging on them. I am an unabashed promoter of humanism, because I don't believe humanism is just an option. I believe it is not the only option for the good life. I know many Christians, liberal Christians, I know you do, who live perfectly great lives for themselves and their communities and their families. I have no problem with that. But I do believe this, that humanism is the best option. It's not the only option, but it's the best option. I don't believe we've done a good job of telling our story, even in our own community. And again, I want to bring out that aspect that we are an evolving tradition. We haven't been fixed. And we're going to tell today that story, that whole Weltanschauung, that whole story tonight. But there's threads of continuity. There's certain ideas that maybe were modified, but still tested, through time. Secularism, rationalism, and atheism are not humanism in themselves. Atheism is a belief. It's a non-belief, really, in God. It just says, I don't believe in God. It is not an epistemological position, meaning it doesn't say why we believe or how strongly we believe. It just says, I don't believe. But conversely, it doesn't say anything, atheism doesn't say anything about if we believe in compassion, truth, justice, democracy, reason. It just says, this is what I don't believe. Personally, as I've said before here, I am not going to be defined by what I don't believe, but what I do believe. And so, let me throw this out to you here. And I am an atheist, but again, that's only one part of who I am. It just says we don't believe in God. It says nothing about why or our certainty or why we do believe, or what we do believe. So if you put a God belief here, you might have a spectrum, where absolutely I don't believe or absolutely I do believe in God. And then there's something in between that. I strongly don't believe or somewhat don't believe, or a strong agnostic position is if I can't make a decision one way or another. I believe, frankly, people say that sometimes, but I don't believe they really believe it. I always believe drill down, you always find that there's a leaning. Agnosticism is the strong position, but agnosticism really is a position that says I don't completely know. But it's more, think about more about certainty. You know, that's really what we're talking about. How certain am I that God doesn't believe or doesn't exist or does exist? So let's talk about what humanism is. Humanism begins with responsibility. The locus of control is us. Modern 20th century and 21st century humanism is naturalistic. It says that this world is all and enough. We know it's all there is, the natural world, but it's enough. We can make all of those, all the wonder and issues, all the excitement we've got in life, our meanings and purposes are derived out of this naturalistic world. And it's not God or fate or magic that guides us. What guides us is reason, compassion, experience, and frankly, all the human tools we have. There isn't just one. Sometimes we get caught in dwelling on one type or another. And I'll say this up front. Everybody here has a different style of humanism. And I hope we can learn to be pluralistic. In other words, there's some of us that are hardcore rationalists. And some of us are hardcore experientialists. And there are some people of all different stripes. Many black humanists have pointed out that it was oppression theory that led them to their humanism. That they found it not through their own personal, well, it was their personal experiences, you know, through their race. But that's what led them, and then they discovered the Enlightenment and all these rational reasons. But what really first led them to it was the oppression aspects. So just realize, I don't believe that there's like different thinkings. Sometimes we put words, adjectives on the front of humanism, like religious or secular or rationalistic or ethical. And you know, and again, basically what humanism is, it says that we believe that this world is all there is. We don't believe in the supernatural. That doesn't mean just God. That means, you know, ghosts and fairies and things like that. But also that we have an ethical responsibility to each other. It is an ethical philosophy. And we're going to find out why that came about, why it was derived. And so, because it's a naturalistic philosophy, our focus is on human welfare and flourishing. Sometimes people say it's human happiness, but scholars recently are more using, Sigmund especially, have been using the term flourishing, because it's not just happiness. We want flourishing. I know you're an artist. We don't want just happiness. There, you know, if you have ideas that there are not just certain levels of appreciation, but there are deeper levels of appreciation. Some would call quality. Have any of you ever read Persig's book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? And it deals with that subject. You know, is there quality? I believe he's right. It's very hard to determine. He spent a whole book trying to figure all of that out. And did a pretty good job, by the way. I believe this, though. Sometimes that many people talk about what is humanism. Is it a, you know, is it a philosophy? Is it a religion? I like the European version. They call it a life stance. It's kind of how we stand about where life is. It includes all those things, the good, the true, the beautiful. It's the whole Weltanschauung, the whole Gemälde, you know, the whole thing. How do you put it all together? And you know, an important story about who we are, where we came from, and how to live our lives. And so maybe it's more an attitude towards life people talk about. Remember I talked about courage? It talks about, humanism really derives from a celebration of life, a celebration of reason and compassion, heart and mind. It's using all those tools to give a full and meaningful life in, frankly, a meaningless universe. So what I'd like to do next, I'd like to tell this history as a story. And it's an epic story. It's the story, frankly, of mostly, not all, of Western civilization. It tells our story about how we evolved, how we changed, and how you study all those philosophers and great thinkers, and at the end of the day, well, what did they say? Well, they all added, maybe they didn't have it right, but they added something important. So we built this whole thing that we call civilization. Now we know that in this story that most of us start with the Greeks, especially Periclean Greece, about 500 BC. And at that time, this was the first culture that looked at reason and open-minded reason and critical thinking to guide them. It had never really been done before. Although there was ideas and things like that before, this is the first time that people really, consistently put that together. But also at the same time, they were challenging whether the gods were in charge or even important. There was also flowering in two other areas, both in India, where the Buddha built a non-theistic religion with the problem of suffering and gave us ethical guidelines in the threefold path to decide that. Confucius in China at the same time built an ethical culture where it is better to focus on humanity with no gods, because ancestor worship had been very important for them. Hey, we just got to come up with some ethical guidelines of how to live our lives, using a lot of the classical Confucian aphorisms. Out of this, though, there were two great cultures that came out of two great cities. Athens showed how reason and free inquiry could be used to solve the problems of human life. And out of Jerusalem, where the three Abrahamic religions evolved out of, was where faith and supernaturalism dominated. But as we know, Athens literature, all that great Greek literature, was hidden. The library at Alexandria was burnt down, and most of those manuscripts were lost to history. Some of them were saved in Spain and Ireland and a few other places were later found, but 1,400 years later. During that time, though, the major religions in the West began to dominate. And from 400 AD to 1400 AD, or 1,000 years, we consider those the Dark Ages. We call them the Dark Ages, and of course those were the ages when theocracy reigned, exactly what the fundamentalists want today. If you want to know what a theocracy looks like, look at the Dark Ages. But what broke it was the Gutenberg press, of course. The Gutenberg press allowed people who heretofore only had the priests to tell them what was in the Bible, and that was the authority coming down. All of a sudden, they could read it for themselves, and they said, my God, this isn't, none of this is in the Bible, or the Bible actually says this. So people started to think for themselves, and that's where the Protestant Revolution came from. But of course, out of that, then we had, tremendous amount of, 30 Years' War, and, Calvin burning Michael Servetus at the stake, and lots of other wonderful atrocities because they were all competing against each other. But from a philosophical standpoint, there were two thinkers, Christian thinkers, that dominated the lines of thought of why God exists and how to live a life as a Christian. First was Augustine. St. Augustine said that it was faith, that reason was imperfect, that we couldn't use it, and it was all faith-based. It was totally based upon our own experiences to believe in God. But St. Thomas Aquinas was different. He said we could use reason. And he came up with, several good reasons, 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 reasons for God, rational reasons for God. The cosmological argument was based upon the first cause. There has to be a first cause. Well, the refutation of that, of course, is very simple. Look, you need a first cause for everything. Who caused God? So it gets in what they call reductio absurdum, the circular argument. The second one was the teleological argument, or that the world's very existence implies a creator. That gets tougher because, everything we see normally, there's something creates it. It's the watch thing. If you find a watch on the shore, and he was the example, who made that watch? And then the ontological argument, where the very definition implies existence. In other words, I can define what God is. God is all-powerful, all-knowing, everything else, so therefore he must exist, because I can make a definition. Well, I can make a definition of unicorns, too, but that doesn't mean they exist. But all of those arguments were later by Kant completely disseminated. It's rather interesting to me that in the 400 years since, there hasn't been any really new arguments, all of them are subsets. The latest new one was Hans Koenig, the great Catholic theologian, who is frankly a total humanist now. And he wrote a 900-page magnum opus, which is wonderful, actually. It's got a lot of good stuff in it, but it's pretty dense reading. But he was the latest one to try it. But again, it was just a variation of the cosmological argument. Steven Pinker's girlfriend, I don't know if anybody can help me. Anyway, she just wrote a book, 30 Reasons for God, and then describes it. Anyway, it's interesting, since in the 400 years since, there's been nothing come up, and nobody can come up with any better arguments, rational arguments. But the Dark Ages ended with the Renaissance, because we found those Greek texts, and all of a sudden people like Abelard and Erasmus start reading these things, and they start changing their view about Christianity. Of course, they were oppressed because of it. These were Christian humanists. What I mean by that, they were Christians. They totally believe in Jesus or God, or at least God. They may not have believed, like Michael Servetus, may not believe in 3 gods, maybe just one, but they believed that human beings, human welfare was more important than worrying about the hereafter. In other words, focus on the here and now. That's where they came about. And reason was a tool, though, in religious affairs. But then we got even worse, and we got the Protestant Reformation and frankly, an age of tolerance. Then we come to the age of the Enlightenment. They say that we are the torchbearers of the Enlightenment. We're the children of the Enlightenment. Newton, Descartes, Hume, Bacon, Locke, Voltaire. All of these people saw that reason could expose the handiwork of God. Now, not all of them, by the way, but many of them still believed in a God, but it was frankly a deist God. God started up this mechanism like a clockwork and then let it go out. But he was impersonal in human affairs. Most of the founding fathers in the United States, other than Adams, were deists. And even Adams, by the end, he was writing as a deist to Thomas Jefferson. There was 10,000 letters that they exchanged back and forth. But the way they saw it, our duty was to understand that clockwork mechanism. And reason and science were better tools than blind faith to obtain the good life. The good life could be obtained with reason. This is actually the beginnings of modernism. It's very important you understand what modernism, because it has been very closely aligned, and rightfully so, with humanism. And what modernism is saying that faith and reason, the Bible, that's over here, but we're going to use reason and compassion, all these tools that we like. In France, Voltaire and many of the philosophers were openly atheistic, but you know what? They didn't have a whole story. You know that Dulce Junction that we're talking about? That whole story, they didn't really have it. They didn't have any better story of the beginning of the earth, of the end of the earth, or how to live our life, or anything else. They just didn't believe in God. They certainly didn't believe in the church. So it didn't go anywhere because we didn't have an alternative story. Emerson, in the early 1900s, developed the idea of the oversoul. And his oversoul, he never defined it. It was always enigmatic, but it was definitely naturalistic. It was mostly a metaphor. Again, he didn't have an alternative story. So he was talking about the oversoul as a metaphor, an evocative metaphor, a binding metaphor to hold us together and give us something transcendent to look towards in life. Nietzsche was a great admirer of Emerson's. Emerson was the one American that he really, really admired. But Nietzsche, as we know, has all these crazy things, good things and bad things. But he came upon the idea that reason, it was I need to go back because he went back to the old romantic notions. The romantic movement, led by Rousseau, was a counter movement to the Enlightenment. And it felt that intuition, our primitive nature, experiences and emotions were better guides than reason. Experiential wisdom is better than cold reason. So, there was a tug of war here going on. Nietzsche came along and he came up with the notion that, most of our reason, he was frankly the first postmodernist. And he said, you know what? Reason, it's just a tool for power and control. That's all it really is, reason. And he came up with the idea that we have the two sides of us, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The Apollonian is the cold, rational, cool, thinking person. The Dionysian is the wild, orgiastic, explosive, impulsive aspects of our being. And we have both of those beings going on. And he more identified, what's interesting, he more identified with the Dionysian side, but in that reality, he was pretty cold and rational and pretty emotionally bound. But he did talk about a will to power. And most of our reasoning is just a will to power. Now, I mentioned he was probably the first postmodernist. We're really talking about this. I'd like to get a hand showing. How many people are familiar with postmodernism? Okay, we've got a couple of hands here. That'll be important as we go along. Again, that portion I told you, most people don't even know about what's happening academically. We're going to talk about that. But Darwin, all of a sudden, comes on the story, on the line. And now, all of a sudden, there's not only a story, it's an evocative story. A whole story of our beginnings, how we came about, and also it identified what it means to be human. More importantly, it showed that a naturalistic universe. Not only are we part of the natural world, we are embedded in it and part of it. We're not before, remember, human beings were above nature, above animals. Now we're embedded in it. And he gave us a beginning story and an end story. Fantastic. Now we have a different story. Changes everything. He didn't even want to let it out because he knew, especially to his wife, he held on to her. What was it, 10, 20 years? Because he was afraid for his wife and how people would treat him and everything else. And again, he couldn't deny the truths that were in front of him. He just couldn't deny that. Now, at the end of the 19th century, we start to see liberal religionists start to change their feelings about things. A group of liberal religions, primarily Unitarians, started the Free Religious Association. It was a group of, Emerson was part of it, Potter, a few others, and they were now thinking naturalistically. How do you work this into a religion whose Unitarianism had a creed, by the way, at that time, of one God, and was a Christian God, etc. And they were, kind of pushed around, but they had a great organization. And by the way, it failed after some years. You know why? They didn't have any organizational substance. These were great people, great ideas, and had a great movement. And it's a great example for us that when we act alone, it helps everything else. But it is only through the power of organizations that we can get our voices heard, get institutional memory and institutional growth of those ideas. So it's a lesson in humanism, to make an organizational humanism. But along those times, too, there were the first feminists. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, stated, no gods, no masters, because she knew that the Bible was the main thing that was holding women down. It was suppressing them. And so they had the great conference up in New York that started the whole feminist movement. And frankly, all of them, most of it, if you read most of the lectures that were given, it was basically free thought lectures about oppression of women by the Bible and religion. That's what it was about. They realized they had to get rid of that first before the men would even listen. But along that time, too, there were the actual free thinkers out of Germany. These were a group of people that were, and they had a song, My Thoughts Are Free, Dickie Duncanson Fry. I don't know if you've ever heard it. Dickie Duncanson Fry, my thoughts give thee power. Anyway, they came out and they were so fed up in Germany with years and years of battling back and forth. The Calvinists and the Lutherans killing everybody. If you didn't believe that was locally, you got killed. And they said, hell with it all. Hell with them all. We're going over to the United States. They came over and they organized all of these, basically communes. Most of them failed as communes because of the problems of communes. But the Manna Colony was one of them. Kurt Vonnegut was a third-generation free thinker. And he proudly, when I talked to him, he proudly held on to that fierce free thinking that nobody's going to control his thoughts. I have, in fact, a lecture I got. We're going to talk here about Colonel John Ingersoll, Robert Ingersoll. Colonel Robert Ingersoll was the greatest orator of his day. Back in those days, there wasn't any movies or TV. When people got entertainment, there was traveling lectures. And he was the greatest lecturer of his day. He could have been president, they said, had he not been the great agnostic. But read the article, the little essay I've got that he wrote. It's actually a speech. He didn't write much, he spoke it out. He was a great orator, and about what it means to think free and act free, away from the oppression of constraints of society, families, religious dictums, and everything. Felix Adler was the son of the great rabbi in New York City. And when he went over to Germany to study, he actually studied in neo-Kantians in Germany. He came back in 1873, and everybody thought, oh boy, they knew he was very bright. He studied under the greatest scholars, German scholars and everything else. He came back to the United States, and he was going to take over his father's synagogue. Well, he gave one sermon, and it was real clear that he wasn't going to be that successor, because he basically argued for humanism. So he immediately then turned around. Some of the people in the congregation loved what he said, and he started the Ethical Culture Society. If you go up on 64th Street, Central Park West, you'll see that building that he has there, the Ethical Culture Society. It was based upon the idea that the way religious scholars then thought, religion, you got all these beliefs and everything else, but in the end, religion boils down to two things: ethics and community. You didn't need all that theology. Just build a worshiping about human beings and teaching them ethical values and ethical principles. And they were neo-Kantian, by the way. Like I said, he studied neo-Kantians. And we'll learn that when we go into the third lecture that I'll do on morals and ethics. But he built the Ethical Culture Society. Out of that they started the NAACP, the ACLU, I can go down the list. In Chicago, where I was from, the ethical humanist group there was the great, who was it, the lawyer in Here at the Wind? My mind went blank.
Clarence Darrow.
Who?
Clarence Darrow?
Clarence Darrow, yeah. Clarence Darrow and Jane Addams, who started the Hull House. Again, these were very ethical, principled people. They were in ethical culture, humanist societies in Chicago, and a lot of other people. But anyway, that was one movement within humanism. But also, like I said, there's this liberal movement that was going on, burgeoning liberal religionists. I want you to think back too. This was a much smaller world now, a much smaller community. Most of the scholars knew each other. Most of the top religious people, they knew each other. They communicated. There wasn't, it wasn't like it is today where there's so many people. They all knew each other and you talked. But at the turn of the century, like within Unitarian Universalism, there was this thing about modernism. There was the statement, and amongst a lot of liberal religions, it was progress, onward and upward forever. That was the motto. Progress, onward and upward forever. Think about what that implies. We'll get back to that later. Jacques Barzun was a great historian. He lived 104 years and wrote God knows how many books. Knew every famous person from Picasso to John Dewey, all the way, all of them, all the famous figures in history. Over 100 years. He wrote his last book when he was 99. And it's a great book. Absolutely impressive because he sees the whole struggle history over the 20th century. He thinks that postmodernism actually started after World War II, and maybe even a little bit before because of the Dadaist movement in art, where, there was no meaning to art. It was anything don't try to make any meaning, not even pretty splotches. But what really killed it was World War I, because that progress, onward and upward, that sense of hope and humanity. Remember, there had been a war in Europe for 100 years. People really thought, Jacques Barzun talks about this, people really thought that we had put an end to war, that people were above that, and science was progressing, industrialization was progressing, we were going to get a better world. The roaring 20s came on, after that, but still, what happened in World War I shocked people tremendously because it showed them this horrible brutality. So that knocked it down a bit. But World War II totally killed any belief in progress. We'll get to that. The beginnings of humanism and modern day humanism began with Curtis Reese and John Dietrich. They were two Unitarian ministers in the Midwest. The Midwest was where the foundations for humanism were laid, because these were the people that were the wild thinkers. They, the experimental thinkers, the staid Brahmins in Boston, they stayed very theistic and everything else. And actually, a lot of them, John Dietrich started preaching a philosophy called humanism. And I've got his 10 sermons here, and I'll tell you, you read these things from earliest 20th century, and they read as clear, as fresh, and evocative today now as they were then. And absolutely done. He'd spend 40 hours on each of his sermons just reading, because he didn't have Christian duties, he just did that. He met up with Curtis Reese, who was calling it religious naturalism. And then they both decided to call it humanism, got together, a lot of other people. There was a lot of humanist books at the time. I've got an old one here. Here's by Edward Howard Griggs, a famous sociologist at the time. There was all kinds of books on humanism at the time. Much more so than now, frankly. Again, most of these people knew each other. And what happened, though, was it grew and grew and grew, but the Unitarian Church was really opposed to it. There was a tremendous battle, and a schism occurred. It was called the Western Conference, where the Western leaders of the humanist movement, frankly, separated off. A pact was put back together based upon what's called the principle of polity, which means each church, this isn't a denomination of Unitarians, it's an association of free churches. The reason is that because the humanists were going to leave. And that's where the law of polity came. Recently, polity. Each congregation gets to choose its own structure, theology, anything it wants, ministers, and they're just an association of free churches. Many people thought that was, and I've talked to people who were involved in that. That was the worst thing that was ever done. They should have just separated off, but that's another story too. But what happened was the Depression came. And keep in mind, I knew two of the remaining survivors of the humanist signers of the Humanist Manifesto. The writer of it, Ed Wilson, and Lester Mondale, the brother of Walter Mondale, by the way. They had in mind at that point that keep in mind that you've got all these ideas now that are converging, where we finally have an idea, a non-theistic view of life, all the pieces fitting in together of the good, the true, the beautiful, morality, where ideas come and everything else. And all of a sudden, the depression hit. And they really were worried that the world was going to descend into barbarism at that point. And they better get this written down. They were literally worried about it because they were worried of the descent into total anarchy. And it was close, if you talk to people. What happened was in 1933, they had a famous philosopher out here in Michigan. Sellers write a draft, and then Roy Wood Sellers wrote the draft, and then Ed Wilson polished it, and several other people, including John Dewey, put it together. They signed it as a Humanist Manifesto 1. You have a copy of that. It was given to you when you came in. Humanist Manifesto 1 is a document of its day. Remember, we're about the tradition. It's definitely all male-written and male-dominated. Man shall do this, and man does this. You know, it's they call Manglish. It's also somewhat socialistic, because you have to remember at the time, Kurt Vonnegut told me, I asked Kurt Vonnegut about it, and he said, you have to realize that capitalism had failed. He said, my father had a hardware store, and we were bankrupt. We didn't have anything. And at that time, there was only one organization that was sponsoring civil rights for women or blacks, any kind of progressive movement, and that was the socialists. As it turned out later on, I came to Holocaust, in McCarthy hearings, all those people, all those progressives, frankly, those liberal progressives, because they maybe went to one meeting, there wasn't any talk of communism or anything else there. We were talking about, freedom for blacks or freedom for women, and then they got blacklisted on Hollywood and things like that. I've talked to some of these people, and they'll say, it was the only game in town. That's where you all went if you were a liberal. And then, of course, in the 50s, they came back to Harvard. And how does, by the way, a quick story. One time at the AHA office, during the McCarthy era, two nicely dressed gentlemen with crew cuts and nice ties and everything else came to the office and said they'd like to learn more about humanism and they'd like to see our records. And it was like, they could have had FBI, painted across there, And so Ed Wilson said, you had to know Ed. He was the funniest guy, in a car. Come on in, come on in, And they were joking, and they stayed there 6 months. 6 months, and they went through every file and everything else, and kept the pretense the whole time. They were just learning about humanism. And they would get calls, oh, you want the FBI guy? He's down here, I'll give him, that kind of thing. So anyway, at the end, it's our honor. The last guy left, and he says, I want you to know I came here ready to bless you guys. And he says, now I'm one of you. Anyway, what happened is World War II came up, and it totally destroyed any beliefs anymore in the goodness of human nature. Before this, there was the idea of the tabula rasa. We'll talk about that later in the second hour. But the tabula rasa, that we had a blank slate, that we were totally a part, not of nature, that we totally malleable by our culture. And that we could be, what it led to was both perfectibility of people and society, that idea. Of course, communism was one of those ideas and other utopian versions. But also, it really it says a lot about that we can mold and manipulate who we are. I believed it in the 60s. How many here did believe it? Anybody here willing to admit? You believe? Come on. I believed it. Oh, yeah, we did it. Total hogwash. We'll talk more about that later. But the point is, we are neither good nor evil, but we have a thin veneer of civilization which overlies an inherent barbarism. It's easily cultivated, as we know. When the greatest cultural society in the world, Germany, descended in the barbars that we saw. Now we couldn't deny it. The optimism that was in Humanist Manifesto 1 was completely trashed by the time we got to Humanist Manifesto 2 in 1973. We couldn't believe that anymore. We had to understand that we are just using token goodness first. I want to point out that during this period, though, there was different philosophical strains. Logical positivism was ascendant, which was saying the only things we can know is that which can be verified. When we talk in the second class, we're going to be talking about that aspect because it had a deep impact all the way through the 20th century. Logical positivism, the only thing that was true is that which can be verified. So if you're talking about God or not, it's not that you can prove it one or another. It's meaningless. It's like saying Baba Woowa. It means nothing because it can't be verified. That was one philosophical trend. Another trend was by John Dewey, who was part of the pragmatic tradition that believed that beliefs are basically those that have cash value, those that have actual production of real world benefits to us. And he called it instrumentalism. And we'll talk about it later because what's happened, I'll give you a little preview. The world has come back to doing that. I believe that he was right all along. And the early humanists were right all along. We went through the whole postmodernism craze and how we're getting out of it. And it's going back to doing that says that the ideas of truth are those things that are scientifically provable in experience. He also talked about he had a book, Common Faith, where he separated the religious from religion. Religion deals with all of these accoutrements, organizations. Religious has to do with our aspirations. These human aspirations for awe and wonder. We talked about a lot of other things. In our last class, we're going to be dealing with a lot more in these kinds of aspects. And frankly, I hope you all stay in each class. Each class is independent, but they all do loosely hang together, and they lead up. All the ideas will lead up to the last class. We're going to try and put all the pieces together. As I mentioned, during the McCarthy hearings, there was a tremendous growth in humanism in the 50s. It boomed. In Unitarian Universalism, 85% of the people were humanists, and very few of them that worked humanists they were all in the Midwest and everywhere else other than in Boston. Today it's about 49%. During that period, Julian Huxley, along with Eleanor Roosevelt, who we have letters wrote the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which is basically a humanist document. It's taken basically out of our organization. We showed most leadership in most of the civil rights aspects, sex education. I could go right on down the list and give you all the who's who. I have given you, by the way, on this history, a copy of the speech that I did here 3 years ago when I first came here. It was our first talk I did. And it's got a lot of this history and things like that. But take a look at it. It's a powerful history. Virtually every leader in psychology, every major person, Carl Rogers, Eric Fromm, B.F. Skinner, Albert Ellis, all of these people have been not just humanists, but strong humanists. Humanists here and active organization. I could just go through all of these, but they all have been very motivated by their humanism. I do want to say that we're going to talk more about it in the second hour, but then the last 25 years, it's been rambunctious and roller coaster ride, both ideas, organizationally, and everything. We'll talk more about that in the second hour. We're going to give you a bio break, but in 2000, we wrote the Humanist Manifesto 3, which I was part of the writing of. You have a copy of that. Compare the two documents, Humanist Manifesto 1 and Humanist Manifesto 2. We tried in both cases to get it on one page because most of the ideas are simple ideas. What humanism is. What humanism is, we got the fancy definition here. Humanism is a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by arts, and motivated by compassion. Notice it's a rational philosophy. It doesn't say rationalism. Affirming the dignity of each human being. It supports liberty and opportunity consonant with social and planetary responsibility. Do you see? You've got a tension between that, we want freedom and individual rights, but then there's also this aspect of social responsibility. Free of theism and other supernatural beliefs, humanism thus derives the goals from human need and interest rather than theological or ideological abstractions. Remember communism? It was atheistic, but it was ideological abstractions. And asserts that human beings must take responsibility for its own destiny. That's who we are. I'd like to leave you. We'll take a Bible right now. And here are the big questions we're ultimately trying to answer. Who are we, really? What is true? How do we know it's true? What is the meaning of life? How should I treat others? What is the good, the true, and the beautiful? How do I handle the problems of life? These are some of just the big questions that we're trying to get to. And we'll see how various humanists have answered some of those questions. Anybody got any questions before we go, or comments or criticisms? Let's take a quick break. Let's be back at 10 after 8. Take a look if you didn't get the literature out there. Also, I've got some of the books that we're going to be talking about tonight up here on display. You can take a peek. Now, one of the things that a lot of humanists believe in is the power of science. And one of the things I told you about different styles, we all have different styles. So let's, if we all have different styles, let's try and analyze those styles of what science tells us, okay? Each one of these is a figure here. I want you to look at these figures and look at those carefully and see which figure you most closely identify with. Okay? What should you gravitate towards? Okay, how about the square? Who identifies with the square? Raise your hand. Okay, we got one. What about the figures? What do you identify with? Which figure do you kind of get drawn towards? Okay? The square. We got one person, two people, right? Okay. Those people, those are analyticals, okay? How about the triangle? You got one person there, okay? That's conservative, that's for sure. How about the circle? A lot of people. Yeah. We got a lot of people. Those people are creatives, okay? And how about the box? Oh, we got a lot of people with the box, right? Okay.
Crackhead. How did you know? Hey, that is scientific. Science.
I'm report the facts, man. Obviously, you got to be careful with scientific results at times. Okay, now we're gonna do something different. I'm going to critique humanism. I'm going to critique humanism from the major critiques that have occurred in the last 25, 35 years. First of all, I'll talk about, and what I mean by humanism, I'm also identifying as modernism. Those ideas that reason and science, and we can have progress and all of that, if you will, the secular ideas that we can make the world better that way. First of all, the first sociologist was Franz Boas, and he saw nature as plastic. Remember we talked about it, not fixed by instincts. Because of that, early humanists thought of saw the rational perfectibility of human nature and society. As we now know, we are both nature and nurture, and probably that nature has a lot more impact than we ever realized. In the last 20 years, especially, the advent of evolutionary psychology has shown this. If you want to read a great primer on it, it's The Moral Animal by Robert Wright. Have any of you read that book? The Moral Animal by Robert Wright. I highly, highly recommend that one. It's a good primer on evolutionary psychology. It shows how we are creatures of our natures. There have been studies done cross-cultural, over 10,000 cultures, show that there's about 208 identifiable traits that all these cultures have, including, by the way, belief in gods, but also incest, taboos against incest, and things like that. Read The Moral Animal, and you'll see how our psychological underpinnings. As it turns out, in the last 20 years, I believe it still goes on. I'm still dealing with the Humanist Institute I'm on. We have a couple of famous anthropologists, and they are still moseying in many ways. And I'm bringing them along. But they are still in the nature-nurture thing about the blank slate. They think that the nurture aspects are much, much higher than the nature aspects. So it's still highly debatable, but there's no question that that old thing about the perfectibility of the human being, it's out the window. If you want to read a good book, a summary of all of that, read Steven Pinker's book, The Blank Slate, where he summarizes the debate quite well. Here's the second challenge. We're going to go down different challenges in what transpired out of it. Religion is belief in God. Most anthropologists, sociologists, evolutionary psychologists, and philosophers of religion see belief in the supernatural as not the defining aspect of religion. We, many times in our communities, because especially the hard atheist community, religion is just stupid belief in God. It's much, much more than that. All of us know what you might call Jack Catholics. People go to church or anything else, but every now and then, but they don't really take the belief seriously. And if you don't believe it, look at the statistics on abortions and birth control. The Catholics are virtually identical with the larger society. So it gets down to many times people talk a good game, but again, it really doesn't have the belief in God really doesn't have the impact. They may use it in rational arguments, things like, I believe abortion is wrong because it's in the Bible tells me so. Well, it's not in the Bible, first of all, but you don't have to say. Most of the sociologists and anthropologists look at religion as a cultural artifact for survival of our species. It's the big debate. Remember, I told you I demark where there's big debates. The big debate today is whether religion is an individually, evolutionarily derived phenomenon or a group-selected one. Most of the biologists believe that group selection can occur, but they don't have any evidence of it ever occurring. There are many people. And by the way, Steven Pinker and some of the other famous humanists that we all know, all are in the individualist camp, and not the aspect of a group selection. Okay, but there's a big debate. It's ongoing. It's good. It's healthy. It's fun. I like watching it, frankly. I like a good fight. But that's what's going on. But regardless, we know it's an evolutionary derived phenomena. What the mechanism was, and what the evolutionary advantage is, we're not sure. Pinker and others see it as an artifact of other things. In other words, for example, religion and belief in God is an artifact of one, our self-awareness, and the aspect that what they call spandrels. It's not a direct effect of religion. It's something else. In other words, for example, group selection by tribalism. It's really tribalism, and it's just one binding connective technique for tribes. Religion is, because you got a priest that controls the thing and everything, and that's how it evolved. But regardless, that belief in God is out the window. That's why we have to talk more about the functional aspects of religion, not the belief aspect, the functional aspects of religion. The functional aspects are binding. That's where religion comes from. Religio, it means bind together in Latin. It's a binding technique for groups and societies to hold together for many reasons. It's also a way of power and control. I went to Hawaii and we visited the priests and kings' private community. Well, they had all these fish ponds and everything else. They had all their maidens there. I mean, they get all the perks. Would you expect according to any culture? You'll see that the priests get all the perks. So think of religion more as having a lot more aspects. Ritual, totem, reverence of things, ethical basis, things like that. All kinds of functional aspects. Max Weber came along, and he said that, now here's an interesting thing about him. He's the first real heavy critique of modernization. I'll read what he said. World historical process of modernization is a process of rationalization, Zwiegratio, purposeful rationality. Reason coming of age triggers historical processes which depersonalize relationships, desiccate symbolic communication, builds anonymous administrative systems, and makes life mechanized, unfree, and meaningless. Rational systems. I'll give you an example. Personal. This last week, in my corporation, we have a process of getting samples out. Well, you think, well, you just order a sample for the person. Oh my God, we have bureaucratic procedure after procedure. This person has to go to this person, and then they fill out this form, and then it goes to this person, they fill this out, and then a person has to okay it. If that person's not in, then it goes over to this person, but maybe not. It's unbelievable, just trying to get out something. It's a great example of bureaucracy. Kafka's nightmare of, and again, what it is. Each step, there's a perfectly rational reason, right? It's rational to have somebody sign off on it. It's rational to have somebody inspect the order and make sure it's right. By the time you get done, it doesn't happen. Rather than one person. See what I'm saying? There's a rationality over each individual process. By the time you get done, the thing's insane. Nothing gets done. We literally can't get an order out for 2 weeks. I'm sure if you've been in big business, you know what I'm talking about. Or yes. So that's what Max Weber is talking about. He's talking about rationality. It's a purposeful rationality for people's ends that may not be the best. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears. We thought rationality was going to tell us that mathematics was absolutely true, right? And it's actually a form of logic. Well, Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead spent 18 years trying to prove from two simple basic premises that mathematics is a form of logic. 18 years. Principia Mathematica is that big. It's huge. They spent 18 years of their life in beautiful, it's incredible, every detail. The whole of mathematics outline, only to find that Russell brought in a new student named Ludwig Wittgenstein, and he had a conversation with him. You're insane. Based on language theory, you can't do it. It's never going to happen. He looked at it and said, you're right. Now, Bertrand Russell, he's a great example of an open-minded humanist. He spent 25 or 18 years developing this. All of a sudden, he realized it was never going to happen. He was wrong. And he quit. Stopped. And he gave up all philosophy because he realized he was past his prime and that was it. And went on. That's when he became an activist, a peace activist, and everything else. But he didn't go, oh, no, I'm right, digging his heels. No, and he didn't go pissing Simone about it. I said, oh, no. You know, it went on. But the point here I'm trying to make, though, underline this, is that we like to think that mathematics has a rational grounding. It does not. It is not grounded on logic. Logic is a grounding. Logic in mathematics is logical systems. It's complete logical systems. Gödel, many people feel people think of Gödel's incompleteness theorem is the greatest intellectual achievement of the 20th century. There's actually two parts of the incompleteness theorem. The first part says that it's unequivocally showed that for any system, I underline any system, not a mathematical system, there will always be statements about natural numbers that are true but unprovable within the system. In other words, if we prove something, that may be true, but there's always something missing. Something outside. It may be true, maybe not, but there's always something missing. The second part of the incompleteness theorem shows that such a system is capable of proving certain basic facts about natural numbers. Then one particular arithmetic truth, the system cannot prove the consistency of the system. Why is this important? It's because during this period, we're going to get into epistemology, we talked about, well, one of the reasons you can tell us something is true is if it's consistent. This says it can't be consistent. Emerson once said, I can remember the quote, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of simple minds. Foolish, and he didn't know about this, but it's also, it carries over. It's not just mathematics. I want to underline that. Any logical system. Here's the next challenge. Cause and effect relationships. You know, I lift this, it falls down. In quantum mechanics, especially with the double slot experiments that goes on, it appears, our underline appears, that cause and effect relationships are broken down. But things can simultaneously occur, or it knows before I drop it, it's going to drop. Now, I will point out that this is in subatomic experiments. And it's been proven time and time again. We know that cause and effect relationship does not hold. It is never, I will underline, or when somebody says, oh, well, that means, you know, some people, religious will say, well, that means then that God can operate because we can operate through distance and it's not cause and effect relationship. We have never seen a cause and effect relationship at the macro level. This is only at the subatomic level. In our humanist group up in Chicago, we've had the past two second-in-command directors of Fermi-Lab, Frank Cole and Bill Alberti. And Frank was he was the guy that actually invented chaos theory. He passed away. He's one of my great mentors. A wonderful man, passed away. Lived a life as a humanist. The last day he was living, he had started the DuPage Community College, which is the largest community college in the country. He did the fine arts centers there. He was a polymath, incredible. He did so many things. The last day he wasn't feeling well. His last days of his life, he was teaching children how to read. And he felt bad, and he felt bad that he had to bow out that day and he passed away. That's the kind of humanist I believe that we should emulate. But they talked about this as well. That, we've never seen this in the macro level, this cause and effect relationship. The same thing with action at the distance. There appears to be sometimes that things happen at the distance that, if I was a subatomic particle, I can affect something over there even if I'm not moving from there. Again, it's not at the macro level. The next one I'd like to step back and get back. I'm jumping all over. I'm hopscotching. I apologize, but this is part of what's happened. Existentialism came on, and I was really into existentialism in the 60s. Existentialism, and by the way, Sartre wrote a great paper you want to get it on the internet, you can. Existentialism as a humanist. He believed it was a humanism, form of humanism. But existentialism says that we have existence before essence. Existence before essence. I look at this, and this cup here has an essence, right? It has an essence of a styrofoam. I know the chemical composition. It's got some print on it, certain shape, and everything else. I know what the essence of that is. Existentialism said that's all well and good, but what is the existence of it? What does it mean to me? I can sip out of it, some cold water, things like that. I'll give you a better example that really goes deeper as to, we were talking about how to live and things like that. These are the important questions about it. He said this, I'll give you an example. If I say, rational statement here, all people are mortal. Is that true? Yeah, all people are mortal, so as far as we know. We are mortal. Here, right? Okay. I am mortal. Right? So they're bringing it down. Now what if I say, I am dying? See the change that happened just then? I went from a rational truth to what does it really mean in my existence, my personal existence. And he rightfully, existentialists rightfully say that, yeah, this is all rational stuff, this is all true, but, this is what's more important. I'll give you another example. And we'll talk about this next week, too. If I say, this color back here is orange color, right? As a scientist, I know I can look at the reflected light off of that, and there's a certain wavelengths of colors, etc. But we can analyze it and everything else. How do I know, underline know, that it's orange? How do I know? Here's a more important one, existentially. I say I love my wife. How do I know I love my wife? How do I prove it? My point is, some of the greatest truths we have are not rational truths or empirical truths, they're existential truths. We'll talk more about that. And the point that they were trying to make, and I have one of the books, the articles that you have an article, we'll talk more about here, about feminist critiques, it's this one here. Rebecca Parker, A Feminist Perspective on Humanism. It's a critique, a soft critique, but a critique, no doubt about it, on humanism, and she's pointing that aspect out, the existential aspects that are needed. The therapy revolution. What did that show? What the therapy revolution showed is that many times we cover ourselves, and everybody here, I'm sure at some time, you've covered yourself in rationalizations, hid your true self from not only others, but yourself. And what is therapy doing? It's breaking down those barriers. Somebody said that therapy is nothing more than holding a mirror to someone. That's what therapy really is doing. It's holding a mirror to someone so you can see yourself. But what happens is we can build up these barriers to see it. Again, what is truth? Is the truth, I'm a human being. No, the truth is, what's going on in the whole... Pardon me. Okay, here's another one. Eastern religions. Remember, Buddha, by the way, Buddha it was totally not theistic. He said, I am not a god, don't want gods, it's a totally national religion. Of course, various versions of it, especially the Mahayana version of Buddhism, is quite theistic. Building Buddha as a god. But the Theravadic Hinayana version are very atheistic, naturalistic orientation. But what the Eastern religions are doing, they're putting the emphasis on direct awareness and really seeing what's going on. Direct awareness, very concentrated, purposeful awareness. One of the codes that they use, the master, is being bombarded constantly by day by this one student. Tell me, what the truth is, where is nirvana and everything, and he finally got fed up and he said, there he is, right there. He goes, what? There it is. It's right there in the garden. Where? He goes, there in the garden, in the reeds. The point is, focus on what's really there, in our world. Very naturalistic thinking, isn't it? Get washed away all the abstractions. That's what we get caught up, is abstractions and our ideology and our thoughts. What's really there? And I'm sure you've seen this in art, we really focus on what are the nuances, what's good. When we look at a tree or a loved one, we really look. Also, one of the critiques has been that humanism is inherently specious, putting humans, like traditional religion, does over other species, anthropomorphic, basically, in some sort of special elite category, discounting that we only differ in degree, in reality, not kind, except for language. And in fact, the humanist Peter Singer was the one that wrote the book. Again, remember I pointed out the critiques on this against humanism have been mostly by humanists. Peter Singer wrote the book on animal rights. And by the way, it's interesting, he's been turning back on that too. But, this is important to understand that we do only differ in degree rather than kind, except for language. The more we learn, we find out more about the cognitive awareness and self-reflective analysis that animals can do. More and more, it's kind of spooky. Are they quite a bit different? No question about it. But it challenges humanism. And to be blunt, in Humanist Manifesto 3, that was one of the things that I fought for in the language. Remember, it's a consensus document. Doesn't mean we all agree. I didn't agree on one line in there. And we talk about that. But I think we have to be more aware of the fact that we have to be careful that humanism isn't totally anthropomorphic. And again, it sees ourselves as embedded in, not apart from nature. That is an ongoing, I guess what I'm getting at is this is an ongoing concern, or ongoing dialogue, or ongoing reflection I think we have to, and a conversation we have to have. Now I'm going to get to postmodernism, which has been the most important critique. What happened was in during the Stalinist years in the 30s, believe it or not, people really didn't know what was going on in Russia. I know it sounds strange, but there was rumors and things like that, but they really didn't know for sure because it was such a closed society. But in 1938, the truth really came out. There was no question about it. And so Marxists and had to really look at what was going on. Is this the kind of culture I really want that does this thing? We can't hide. Some, of course, automatically stay with communism, but mostly left there. There was a group of thinkers in Europe, in Frankfurt, at the New School for Social Thought, which is still in existence today, the most important institution in Germany, actually. But people like Horkheimer, Adorno, Marcuse, Habermas, these are thinkers that started looking at this. And Horkheimer and Adorno wrote a book called The Dialectic of the Enlightenment. And what it basically says is the Enlightenment. Remember, we see ourselves as children of the Enlightenment. That the problem with communism was the Enlightenment. How do you say that? It wasn't just the Enlightenment, it was reason. What happens, they say, is that ideology develops out of purposeful rationale. Remember Weber's original analysis? And that it not only can, it has to happen. And that what happens is the power elites control reason and intellectual thought. It's not the lower classes. So whoever in the higher class, be it in the Middle Ages, the priests, they had the Bible, right? They control knowledge. So knowledge and reason are not just neutral things. They're used as weapons, as tools for power and control. See how that works? I like to put it this way, that we are not so much rational animals as rational